Today we'll discuss transcendentalism. Transcendentalism, which is a philosophical and literary movement that developed in New England in the early 19th century. Trans- Transcendentalism began with the formation in 1836 of the Transcendental Club in Boston, Massachusetts, by a group of artists and writers. There's evidence that the group was involved in somewhat of a protest against the intellectual climate of Harvard climate. Harvard, interestingly enough, involved. Interestingly enough, many of the transcendentalists were actually Harvard educated, but they never met in Cambridge. Remember, at this time Harvard had only 11 professors, and at least 11 members could be expected to attend a meeting of the Transcendental Club. So their intellectual community was large enough to rival the Harvard faculty. Alright then, their criticism of Harvard was that the professors were too conservative and old-fashioned. Oh. 안녕하세요. 하나, 안녕하세요. Which, come to think of it, isn't an unusual attitude for students when they talk about their professors. But in fairness, the classroom method of recitation that was popular at Harvard required the repetition of a lesson without any operational understanding of it. In contrast, the transcendentalists considered themselves modern and liberal because they preferred a more operational approach to education. Bronson Alcott translated transcendentalism into pedagogy by encouraging the students to think, using dialogues and journals to develop and record their ideas. Language was viewed as a connection between the individual and society. In 1834, Alcott established as a temple school near Boston Commons, and later founded a form of adult education which he referred to as conversation. Conversation. This was really a process whereby the give and take in a conversation became more important than the doctrine that the teacher might have been inclined to pass on to students, an approach that stood in diametrical opposition to the tradition at Harvard that encouraged the students to memorize their lessons. Diametric opposition to the tradition at Harvard that encouraged the students to memorize their lessons. The Transcendental group also advanced their reaction against the rigid Puritanism of the period, especially insofar as it emphasized society at the expense of the individual. Insofar ってなんだ It emphasizes society at the expense of the individual. The Puturians, I mean. The Transcendental group also advanced a reaction against the rigid Puturianism of the period, especially insofar as it emphasized society at the expense of the individual, the Puritans. I mean. According to the Transcendentalists, the justification of all social organization is the improvement of the individual. So, in the literature of the time, the Transcendentalists insisted that it was basic human nature to engage in self-expression, and many interpreted this as encouragement for them to write essays and as opinion pieces. One of the most distinguished members of the club was Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who served as the editor of the Transcendentalist literary magazine, The Dial. His writings stressed the importance of the individual. In one of his best-known essays, Self-Reliance, he appealed to intuition as a source of ethics. Uh, Asserting that people should be the judge of their own actions without the rigid restrictions of society. You can imagine the reaction of the church, in particular the Unitarian Church, in which many of the intellectuals held membership. If individuals were responsible for their own code of ethics, then the clergy, and the entire church organization was threatened.